We have HIlton with us today and Ilana Shapiro donating their time, and they are going to speak with you about their career paths, and you'll have a chance to ask them some questions. Okay, just a couple of business items here. We do have several more programs coming up this semester, and Flora, who is one of our student staff, hi Flora, thank you for being here, will share that career series flyer in the chat. So you can open that whenever you like. And we will be finding out a little bit more about all of you right now too. So in the chat, please, could you let us know what year you are and what your major is? So in the chat, just go ahead and throw in your year and major so we can let Katie and Ilana have an idea of who is in this Zoom room with us. Let's take a look there. And I'm just going to say some of these aloud. So we've got second year econ, fourth year econ, more fourth year econ, second year econ and global sustainability, a couple of pre-com in there, econ and statistics, econ and computer science. I'm thinking that's econ and computer science in the college, econ and English. I'd say like one or two of those a year. Okay, great. That gives us a sense of who's in the room. Thank you so much for that. So I'm going to take this as, you know, people of all varying experience with working for the government. And while this isn't a program about just straight, you know, introduction to government work, you will hear a little bit. You'll get exposed to some of the recruiting process for government work. Okay, so Ilana, Katie, we literally want to know how you got your jobs, how you came into your work in the public sector, and what you did at UVA to help you get there. All right, we want to know how you approached your internship and job searches, and then landed your work with the EPA and DOJ. So if you would please, let's get a brief skim of your resume while you were at UVA. Okay, so this is not since, this is just UVA resume, and it'll give us a foundation of, you know, your background before you started your job search. Who wants to jump in first?
I can go ahead. So hi, everyone. I'm Ilana. I graduated in 2018. I studied economics and foreign affairs, and I also had a French minor. I think when I came to UVA, I was really open-minded. I definitely didn't have a sense for what I wanted to do. I knew I wanted to study French. I thought maybe I wanted to be a French teacher. And then I kind of let my curiosity guide me, I guess I'll say. So at UVA, first year, I got involved with the University Democrats and the club cross country team. My second year, I joined the University Guide Service and was a tour guide. I also got involved in research through the politics department, and I ended up doing that with 3 different professors. So I worked on a couple different projects. I studied abroad through the UVA in Lyon program, and that I think was probably like the most formative semester for me. I loved it. I really enjoyed living abroad and just like experiencing French culture, using French, traveling around. And so that made me think I wanted to work and do some type of international work. So my fourth year, I had ended up applying to the Batten 5th year MPP program. I was interning at the Charlottesville International Rescue Committee, and I was really, really enjoying it. And I liked the work with, you know, diverse populations. I liked bringing people to Charlottesville and settling them in. I found it extremely rewarding. And I knew, I think then, that I wanted to do something related to public service. So I ended up deciding not to do the Batten MPP program and applying instead to the Peace Corps in Morocco. And I went there right after graduation, and I was there until March of 2020 when I was evacuated along with the entire Peace Corps and came back. So I'll stop there. I hope that was what you were looking for.
We'll pick up there in just a minute. Okay, Katie, let's hear about your skim of.
Sure. So I came into UVA as a first year thinking I was going to double major in math and English. That was like my grand plan. And that clearly didn't happen. I got sort of into the English major, and I was like, oh, I don't want to do this anymore. I just liked reading books. I didn't really want to, I don't know. So I was like more interest in that. So I took intro econ because everyone took intro econ with Elzinga, and then I was like, oh, this is really cool. And I found it paired really well with math. And so that's how I got to be double major. So I was double major in math and economics. And at UVA, the main things that I did were I was a RA, a resident advisor for about a year and a half. I was really involved in Phi Sigma Pi, the honor fraternity, and I worked at Take It Away, the sandwich shop. You guys have been there. I was a bookkeeper there for a while. And sorry, they're taking out the trash in my apartment, so if there's noise, I apologize. I was a state dialogue moderator, so I really enjoyed doing that. Yeah, that's what I did at UVA, and my job search was really all over the place, and I'll probably talk about it later. But I just knew I wanted to go somewhere in econ, which is what led me to DOJ.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. So then how did you, and I want you to be able to talk a little bit about, Ilana, how you decided to go to the Peace Corps. So in the following question, both of you, if you could share how you settled on your first job, what led to that, and then what led to the next, because you both are now looking at, one is in your second position, and Katie, you're headed into your second position.
So yeah, for me, it kind of all ties together. I am from the DC area. My parents worked for the federal government, so I was aware of Peace Corps like from pretty early. Several of my parents' friends had done Peace Corps, so it was definitely on my radar. And I remember going to some information sessions about it, like my first year, and being like, "Oh, this sounds really cool." I ended up really falling in love with Morocco when I was studying abroad in France, and I was like, "How can I figure out how to get to Morocco?" And turns out Peace Corps had a program in Morocco. So for me, it kind of all came together pretty nicely in that way. And then another perk of Peace Corps, which I'll probably talk more about later, is non-competitive eligibility for government jobs. So a certain number, not all, but many federal agencies take Peace Corps volunteers through a non-competitive hiring process, which makes it a little bit easier and more straightforward to get those jobs. And I knew that I thought I wanted to work probably for the federal government at a place like EPA or USAID or state or something similar. So I felt like it was a sort of natural, a kind of like next step that would eventually get me to where I wanted to go, but also in the short term, get me to Morocco and doing sort of like development work and teaching English, practicing French, and learning Arabic. So yeah, it kind of worked out pretty nicely.
So yeah, starting out, my job search, my fourth year, I had no idea what I wanted. So I was a double major in math and econ. I was like, I did a lot of like those, applied like those like business analyst positions at different firms, and then I did those interviews. And I was like, I don't want to do that. I just was I can't impress enough how confused I was. And so but I like knew I was in quantitative work and wanted to keep doing that. And then I took so I work at the DOJ right now within the antitrust department. And I took the antitrust seminar, which is usually taught by Elzinga, but my semester was taught by Anthony Swisher. And I just really liked it. It's a really cool class. I highly recommend taking it. It's like structured a little differently than other econ classes. It's a little more seminar-like. You read a lot of case law. And so that I just thought was really cool. It like opened my eyes to a different branch of econ that I didn't know about. And then I saw a position on Handshake for research assistant in the antitrust department. So it like I had already had this background, and so that's why I applied. And I feel very fortunate that I found that and that I liked it, because I think I thought about going to law school for a little bit, and I don't think I'm going to do that, but it just was a really great intersection of economics and law, and still being able to like stay like doing quantitative work. So I mostly work with data all day, and I really appreciated that. So that's how I got to DOJ. And so, yeah, I'm about to leave DOJ. I've been there about 2 years. And I'm going to US News and World Report to work as a health data analyst. And so I really loved my job. I can't say enough good things about it. And what I really like about it, I work with data all day, like I think messy data is like interesting, and you can find cool questions out of it. And so I want to keep doing that. And I think the intersection of news and data is really cool. So that's what led me to my current job search, and then to this new position, which I'm excited about. But it is going to be strange, I think, to leave. So to leave the federal government. It's the application process takes a long time. It's very, so I think going to private sector is going to be interesting, but I'm excited for it.
Okay, I'm going to want to go into both of those points. You're both bringing up a little bit about what you, how you got to be where you are, a little deeper, and what you do on the job. But let's start with that. Let's start with what you do in your daily work on the job and telling us about a project in particular that you've been excited about.
Katie, do you want to go first or should I go?
You got it. You
Okay.
you go.
All right. So at EPA, my title, official sort of government title, is a program analyst. If you've explored USA Jobs, you'll be maybe familiar with the different series titles for the type of work that you do. So it's like a four number combination, and it sort of indicates what might fall into your work category. So mine is 0343. It's management and program analysis. The title is program analyst, but my role specifically is special assistant. So this is a sort of type of position that exists, I know, in the government, and I'm sure across other types of organizations, but it's sort of like assistant, but also sort of like working with the director of the office to sort of oversee office operations, organize things, liaise with different people with different offices. So I do that. My office is called the Office of Underground Storage Tanks. It's very specific. Don't forgive yourself if you haven't heard of that environmental topic. And I'll get into how I ended up there, I guess, later. But I'm a special assistant, so I do sort of like that type of organizational work, talking to different people, making sure our office meets deadlines. We get a lot of requests from the program office, which is the sort of larger office that oversees, ours is land and emergency management. So all of the offices that do that work fall within that. So from the leadership of that office, we'll get requests to send documents, reply to different things, make comments on various documents, prepare briefings, things like that. So I do that. And then since that work doesn't quite take up all of my time, I also do some sort of like typical program analyst work. So working with different data sets, responding to data needs of the office. We do most of our own sort of like program assessment in my office. So we do like, mid-year and end of year reporting, track those, and see trends, forecast trends. And then y'all may be familiar with environmental justice, which is a big sort of current administration priority. And so in the past couple of months, we've had a big push to get more involved in looking at environmental justice in relation to different EPA programs. So I'm on a project right now that's sort of an environmental justice pilot, and we're working with 3 different states to sort of look at their universe of underground storage tanks and releases, and determine different ways that we could incorporate environmental justice considerations into protecting the existing tanks and also cleaning up releases. So those are sort of the 2 main things that we do. And I think that's really interesting because I had not known anything about environmental justice. And it's, as I said, a really relevant topic in this current administration. So I'm getting to learn about the topic and the background of it. It focuses on sort of addressing the fact that environmental burdens are disproportionately spread around the country, often to communities that already face burdens, including lower educational attainment, higher minority populations, and various other things. So yeah, so it's interesting, and it feels like connected to why I joined the EPA, which is the fact that I wanted to do public service and use my days and my work to make an impact in whatever way that I could. So that's a project that I'm working on right now. That's exciting.
So I don't know if you found this. I think in the federal government that sometimes the titles can be, so technically my title is statistician, and I've never used that. Like, so if you read a lot of federal government jobs, looking federal jobs will be on USA Jobs. And so if you look it up, it would be under statistician, but I've never been called that by anyone I've worked with. And so some people call us a research assistant, some I'm research associate, I heard like sometimes analyst, anyway. So I usually just use RA. So I think titles sometimes can be interesting, but that's technically my title. So what I do is so I work in the antitrust department, and antitrust is interesting because it's more so than other types of law. It really follows very closely with economic theory. So in the antitrust department, there's a whole office of just economists and who are like doing analyzing things. And so I work with those economists. There's about 50 economists and 8 RAs. And so I'm one of those RAs. And I do sort of whatever they need to to see if something is anti-competitive. So that which is really a broad sentence. But a lot of what DOJ antitrust does is when companies are really big and want to merge, if they're above a certain threshold, they have to submit something to the DOJ and say like, hey, like, are we good to merge? And then so we evaluate that. And so with that, they submit tons and tons of data. And so I clean that data for economists. So I mostly work with data in R. And so I clean it. I make a lot of visualizations, make a lot of maps, which I like super enjoy. And so, yeah, that's what I do. A project. So it depends on, my work varies a lot based on what case I'm working on at any given time. The last couple months, I've worked really intensely on a reinsurance merger. And what I also like about my job is I've gotten really into niche products that I had no idea that existed before. And so I know a lot about the crane, like giant seaport cranes I didn't know before. But there's a whole industry of sometimes companies get insurance, and then insurance companies, if they feel that they took on too much liability, they will buy reinsurance, which I didn't know was a product. And there's a company that connects those insurance companies to reinsurance companies called a reinsurance broker. And there's only about 3 of them in the world, and they make billions and billions of dollars. Anyway, so two of them were trying to merge. And so I was working on this merger for a long time. We sued to block it, and then they dropped, so they're not going to merge anymore, which is very exciting. So that's a project that I worked on for a long time. And part of the reason why I like my job is because what I said before is I knew nothing about that industry. Also, I think reinsurance broking sounds really boring on its surface, and it sort of is, but it like really matters, it would have a lot of downstream effects like for consumers, and for like it would just make prices rise. And so I like that aspect of it. And so that's been interesting for me to get like really niche deep dives into various products. So that's something I've been working on. It recently ended, but what I was working on lately.
Okay, thank you. I mean, really great introduction to a couple of other industries that we might not even have thought about before. So transportation, logistics, sea cranes, I mean, thank you so much. So other career areas, right, that you all could consider as well. So I want to give our students a chance here to just ask any questions about what you've heard so far. I'm going to get into some really specific questions now about the job application process, resumes, what successful candidates in the application process might look like, from Ilana and Katie's point of view, having been through those processes, but anything that we've covered so far. Any questions from all of you? You can unmute your mic and introduce yourself and ask your question, or send something in the chat. Okay, I see Flora has been active in the chat, sending resources to our students, so that's great. You can take a look at those. I'm scanning the chat right now to see if we have any questions from our students. Okay, and I'm going to move onward. All right, great. All right, so let's talk about the application process. It sounds, and we'll focus on EPA and the DOJ process rather than talking about Peace Corps. If anyone has specific questions about Peace Corps, they are welcome to add them into the chat here. So what was your application process like? Katie, let's start with you. Yours took place mostly when you were on grounds. You talked about how you went through a lot of other jobs before you landed on this one, interviews, and it was confusing. I want to hear more about that because I would imagine that many of our students could relate to that.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I did a lot of my jobs were processing grounds. I did a lot of interviews in Scott Stadium and did that whole process. And so this specific job I did hear about on Handshake, and so applied through that. And so I applied. The thing you need to know about government jobs, I don't know if you've experienced this also, like everything takes a really long time. So the process is just going to be very drawn out. So I applied, and I think probably March, maybe before that. Anyway, like my interview was in March, so I probably applied sometime in February. So, and then I had another interview in April, and then I got a tentative offer of employment the day of graduation. And then anytime federal government, you have to go through a background check. So I didn't get my final offer of employment, like that was permanent, until the summer after graduation. So it was just anytime you're thinking about entering the federal government, just know things take a long time, and that's just very normal. It's just because there's a lot of different bureaucracy things have to go through. So that was very stressful, I think, for me. So I had another job offer. I turned it down because I thought this was going to work out, which I'm glad I did in hindsight, but it was a stressful decision-making process. So I think I landed on this job versus another one that I got because I really like the idea of using my econ degree to write antitrust all about protecting the American consumer and like fighting for lower prices. And I just felt really good about that idea versus working on this. It was a finance job, and I felt better about that than working on the other side of things. But yeah, my interview process I applied to lots of different types of jobs, and started my job process like pretty early in my 4th year, and so did a lot of different interviews of things that I just really wasn't sure what I wanted. And so I feel like the interview process was stressful, but really helped me cement of hearing about jobs like, oh, like I would want to do that, or I really wouldn't want to do that. Because I feel like I did have one internship, but other than that, I didn't have a lot of like real world experience. And so I think interviewing did help. I think it's sometimes what I didn't realize, it really is a two-way street, right? They really want to hire you. So, and like they need people to work for them. So you like really do get a sense of what these jobs could be like, and it's not worth taking a job that it's your whole life. So it's how you spend 40 hours a week or less. So the interview process was good for me to hear about more types of jobs, if that makes sense, and figure out what I wanted, and let me lead on a job that I've really enjoyed for 2 years. So that's sort of how I got to DOJ.
So it sounds like that, Katie, you entered, both of you, Ilana and Katie, entered into a pretty good job market. As you know, 2020 was not a good job market for our students, but this year things are better. And for those 2nd and 3rd year students on the line, I think, fingers crossed, things will continue to improve. So there may be a situation where they have multiple opportunities and multiple offers, and that's what I'm hoping that they do have. So using, the ECO and the Career Center, friends and family, to help prioritize what's important, your values, work-life balance, all of that is something that you want to think about. And it sounds like, Katie, you were thinking about that. I do want to go back and talk more about what the interview was like, but I also want to quickly jump in with Ilana and hear about your process. And maybe Ilana, you can share with us what the interviews were like for the EPA.
Yeah, okay. So I admit my experience was a little bit untraditional because I was in the Peace Corps, was not planning on applying to a job within the next 6 months, and ended up sort of being put into that position. But before I left for Peace Corps, and just because I don't know, kind of like a risk averse person, I had talked to contacts at EPA and at USAID my 4th year and the summer after my 4th year, just in case Peace Corps didn't work out. There's always these stories about people ending up not going for whatever reason. So I had kind of a network of contacts in those agencies, and I talked to people through my parents, through people that my parents knew. So that was a good way to do it. But you can also do it on LinkedIn or through UVA alum. People are happy to talk to you. So definitely don't be shy about that. But that's the way that I had done it. And so when I was evacuated from Peace Corps in March of 2020, I got home and I was like, oh my gosh, will there be jobs? I really was eager to use my non-competitive eligibility. So I put together my federal resume. And this is one thing I would say, if you're interested in working for the federal government, definitely put some time into it. A federal resume will be a lot longer than your traditional resume, like 2, maybe 3 pages if you have a lot of experience. And when applying to federal jobs, they're looking to see that federal resume. They're not looking to see your 1-page resume. So at a sort of minimum, make sure that you have what they're looking for, which is that more built out resume. They're organized a little bit differently, and you just present your experience in a bit of a different way. And I know UVA and the ECO, I'm sure, and also the regular Career Center has a lot of resources for how you can sort of approach building a federal resume. So I got back from Peace Corps in March of 2020. I made my federal resume, and then I reached out to some of my contacts that I had made a couple years prior. And one woman at EPA offered to basically send my resume out. And EPA is probably the biggest employer of the non-competitive eligibility Peace Corps volunteers and AmeriCorps volunteers. So they're ready to go. They know what it is. And they knew that all of the Peace Corps programs around the world had been evacuated, and those people would be looking for jobs. So people were sort of ready to be hiring, I think, by the time I sent my resume out. So I had this contact of mine sort of just circulate my resume to people she thought might be hiring, and ended up actually getting contacted that way. So I didn't apply to my current job on USA Jobs, although I was applying for different positions through USA Jobs and through the Peace Corps Job Board, which ultimately links to USA Jobs. So I sent it out. I got some emails and phone calls from different people, and ended up talking to maybe 3 different offices on the phone. The one I ended up with, the Office of Underground Storage Tanks, I spoke with the office director on the phone. We talked about what I was looking for. She talked about what her office was looking for. That was sort of like my first interview. I did a more formal interview with her, and then with the deputy office director. Both were pretty casual. I think they were kind of waiting for me to say yes to the offer, because it just sort of ended up that they had the availability to hire someone. The job hadn't even gone up on USA Jobs yet, but it was pretty informal, I would say. And so, yeah, so that I guess that's
So once you're in the system, which you were, things may happen differently than if you're not in the system, which in Katie's case, you were not already in the system. So let's hear the difference between the two. Can you walk us through what your interview process was like?
For sure. Yeah. So it's definitely a little bit more formal than that. So the my job research, they sent like flyers out to Handshake and other universities. So that's how I applied. So I like sent my resume. I haven't actually heard of that fellow resume thing. I just submitted with my like typical resume. So it wasn't. They were specifically looking for like econ undergraduate. So maybe it was like a smaller pool. But so I submitted the writing sample, resume. I didn't have a cover letter. They didn't ask for a cover letter, and references to like the person who's hiring. And then I didn't hear back for a long time. I thought it was like nothing was going to happen. And then I did a phone. A couple months later, or I think it was a month or 2 later, I did a phone interview, and that was very short and very like just making sure like you really did go where you say you went. Like you can talk about one data experience that you've had. Like it was just pretty. I think it was 15 minutes with a manager and 1 RA. And then after that, it was another chunk of time later. And then it was March where I did my final interview. And then that was when I went down to DOJ. I guess it's probably different now. When we hired, we did all virtual, but when I was doing it, I went down to DOJ in DC, and then did an afternoon of interviews. So I did an interview with the manager. I did 2 different interviews with 2 different economists, and then like a group interview with all the current RAs. And my best advice for interviewing for those types of jobs, especially econ or quantitative jobs, are to have like a really strong example of like a data experience. And it doesn't have to be complicated at all. Like using an econometrics lab would be totally fine. Like just have an example that you can walk through step by step of like, this was the problem that I started with. This is what we did to clean the data and fix it. And like, this was the result. Almost every interview I've ever had of a quantitative job asked that question. And you're going to be so much more prepared if you have that answer laid out. And it doesn't need to be a complicated thing. It could be a problem set. It's just, you need to be able to explain it very well of like the thought process that you had going into it. And you can prepare for that really easily. I'm sure you've all heard of the STAR method, the situation, task, action. Okay, so sometimes interviewing, if you get a question, they're like, oh, like, what's the time you've worked with somebody, or anyway, anything sort of vague, and you're trying to tell a story. If you break your answer up into 4 pieces using STAR, S is situation, T is task, A is action, and R is result. So like if very broadly example, like my situation was that I was hungry, right? My situation is that I'm hungry. My task is to figure out how to be less hungry. My action, eat a sandwich. The result is that I was less hungry. It's just a way to structure any single story that you tell in an interview. And sorry, I got a little off topic, but I've always used that for interviews because I get incredibly nervous. I just like really have a hard time. So any prep you can do of stories you have, like pull out your back pocket, is really helpful. So at DOJ, I submitted a research paper I'd written from econ and from my econ class. And so I could talk about that really easily because I'd read it a lot and because I had practiced like telling the story of it. So, and I think that was really helpful in my interview experience especially for this job, they were looking for research. So that was interesting. And I was even with economists, and economists are just like all your professors that you'll have, and they love to talk about their research. So any question you can ask to them about like, oh, like, what are you working on? Like, you'll get a good sense of who they are, and they'll be very eloquent. So those would be my 2, but if you're interviewing with economists or any quantitative job, have a story and just ask questions of what they're doing, because they will love to talk about it. But and so then yeah, I had that final round interview, and then I got a tentative offer a month later, and then went through the background check process, and so then it was finalized by the end of the summer.
Okay, great. Katie, just quick follow-up. Can you
Yeah.
talk a little bit about that group interview
Sure.
when you were with your research assistants who are up also for the position, I guess? Is that what it was?
Oh, sorry. No, it wasn't. It was like with a current, oh, it was like all of the current research assistants they had. So it was like 5 people and me. So that actually was the best part of the interview for me. It was a little more casual, and it was much more like hearing about the job. It was like people who were really doing the job you had. And you should always ask about like, oh, like, what do you really do day to day? And like, how do you get your work? I think is an important question to ask, because that'll give you a good sense of if the office is organized or not. But like, oh, like who gives you work day to day, or how are assignments parceled out? I think you should always ask the person who has your job. But so that was it was a shorter, just like, this is what the RA is actually like.
And just piggybacking on that, if you do not have a chance in your interviews to be set up with someone who already is in the job or has been in the job, certainly ask, right? As Katie is suggesting, I've been in that position myself as well. If there isn't anyone in that role, you can find people on LinkedIn who may have been in that role. You also might want to find out why there's not anyone in that role, and there are ways to ask that question, which I'd be glad to speak with you about, in future appointments or meetings. Okay, terrific. Thank you both so much. So you talked about reaching out to people, having conversations, networking. Can you talk a little bit more about that, and what do you say? Who did you contact? How did you ask them for help?
Should I go ahead?
Sure.
Okay. Yeah, so I found I knew like working for the federal government, something I wanted to do, working in public service, but I had no idea like what that meant or what the work was like. I just felt like it was this like gigantic sort of like black box that I didn't understand. So I started with like family friends who worked for the government, and I found that they were really happy and excited to talk about their work. And that, I think, for me sort of like reinforced that I wanted to do that, because it was nice to hear people be really excited and driven by their jobs. Yeah, and from them, I'm sure you all have heard this advice before, but ask for 2 contacts that you can reach out to from them. So, say like, okay, it was great. So great to talk to you. I'm curious about this area of work that you said, or this thing you mentioned. Is there someone else I can talk to? Could you refer me to a colleague of yours, or just someone else who does that, or a friend of yours? I don't know, DC circles are so small. Everyone's friends work for the government too. So even if they're not doing what you're interested in, their friends might be. And just sort of kept going through that, neighbors. Yeah, and kind of just kept that link up. And I found that, do your research as much as you can find out beforehand about what they do and what their work is like, so that you can come to the conversation prepared. But just curiosity, being excited and asking good questions, like have a list of questions that people are really receptive to, or people say, oh, that's a great question. Ask them what they do during their day, ask them why they like it. I think people who work in public service really like to talk about those things. So I never found it challenging to get someone to say yes to a discussion. But then, of course, it's really important to follow up, maintain those contacts, even if it's like a year later, just say like, hey, this is what I'm doing right now. It was so great to talk to you a year ago. And then, of course, right after the conversation, send a thank you and maybe a reminder about those 2 contacts as well. And then if you're informational interviewing, like if you're sort of using that interview process to try to network your way into a job, you could ask for a referral or ask for a follow-up conversation for a referral. So it takes a lot of time, and I think in the beginning can be tough to put yourself out there, but I have found that people are always really receptive to it, and excited to talk to you if you are excited to talk to them.
So I don't have too much to add on top of that. I will say I didn't do a ton of networking when I was undergrad, so I remember I got the advice a lot of like, oh, just like, talk to people and get advice. And I think it is good advice, but I remember being frustrated by that, because like, I don't know anybody that works for federal government. I'm not from the DC area. I just like wasn't. So I think it's definitely helpful and really good, but especially for government jobs, like you don't need it. It's not gonna, a lot of private companies will, there's incentive for employees to bring people in. So there is that work, but like for government, you all could apply for my position, and I would love that. I have no sway in that, right? Like you knowing me isn't going to help that. Like the government's really structured. So I think for especially if you're applying to government jobs, you're really going to be, don't stress too much if you don't know anybody in like the office or anything, because they're really trying to structure it so that isn't going to be a hindrance to you. And so I will say for this, I had job searched again pretty recently. And I do know more people now because I've been in DC and everyone works for the government, and everyone is like, it is scary to ask people about their jobs. People love talking about themselves and asking about their jobs. So it never hurts to send an email and be like, hey, would you mind hopping on the phone and talking to me? It's always good advice. It's always helpful. But yeah, if you don't have those contacts, I would say, especially coming out of undergrad, don't stress. You're going to be fine. You're definitely still going to get a job. It's not going to be make or break for you. It just, I don't know, the more you apply to jobs, the more comfortable you get with those conversations, the more you'll know people. But I didn't do a ton of networking in undergrad. So yeah.
So the nice thing, thank you both for those responses, important advice, certainly about, reaching out, responding, staying in touch with people, always saying thank you, right? Really, really important. And I think sometimes in quantitative roles, maybe there is less of an emphasis on networking. I mean, across the board, private and public sector, that might be possible. As far as networking goes, as UVA alums, you all have a vast network. And while Katie didn't need to use that as much in her search, if it had become more imperative, she could have gone on to LinkedIn, Virginia Alumni Mentor Network, right? This idea of being part of UVA for all of you gives you access that you might not have otherwise. I was a first generation college student, so I can speak from experience. I knew about like 5 jobs, in the world. And so, coming to UVA was really instrumental to me in opening up my world. And I went to a lot of different career events. Going to one in Newcomb Hall, a panel of alumni who worked in the film industry, I was like, oh my gosh, I can talk to these people. It was fascinating to me and really did open up the whole world, which is one of the reasons why I work here, to give back. So now I want to open this up to our students. You can ask questions of Katie and Ilana. I have a lot of questions here to go through still, but this is really an opportunity for you all to ask questions that have been on your mind during this call or that you came into the call thinking about. So what I'll ask you to do is either send them in the chat and I'll read them aloud, or turn your mics on, introduce yourself, and ask your question.
I have a quick question. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I'll repeat it if I can hear you.
Okay, incredible. I had a question for Katie about her experience working with data. Something I feel a little bit uncomfortable or like worried about is like in an interview that would be like talking about a quantitative data experience. Did you have I guess when you said that I know you mentioned you submitted a research paper as part of your application. Could you talk a little bit more about that and sort of just like their advice on that?
Sure. So I think I understood you. I'm just going to repeat the question to make sure. You're asking to talk more about applying with quantitative experience in the research paper and things like that. Is that okay? Sure. So I remember I was pretty nervous applying to quantitative jobs because I was a math and econ major, and my math major, specifically the route I took, was pretty theoretical, and so I was nervous I didn't have enough raw quantitative experience. And so what I would say to that is, what helped me out a lot, I took the class Economic Inequality with James Harrigan. I don't know if he still offers it. It was incredible. One of my favorite classes I took. B, you end the class with a research paper, and that research paper really helped me both do my own data analysis and give me something good to talk about. So I'd really recommend taking either that class, because it was incredible, or just any econ class that ends with a research paper, because that'll give you really solid experience to talk about. The experience of writing one and working with your own data set is really important. I also took the data science school has a intro, I think it was 4001, I don't remember exactly the number, but an intro data science, basics of data science. And that was it was mostly just an introduction to R. And if you're looking for that was also a really great class for me, that I just learning some like basics about some coding that I hadn't done in other classes. So yeah, anyway, those would be my two like class recommendations for that. And then just getting really comfortable with those examples. Even if you don't do that, right, everybody has to take econometrics. That's going to give you really strong data experience. And that's definitely worthwhile and very important. If you could just, you get really comfortable with one of your labs and are able to talk about like the regression you used and like the commands that you're comfortable with, that'll also get, that's a perfect example. Any employer would be happy with that, of like, if they're asking you to talk through a quantitative problem and you say that you worked this data set and this data, you cleaned it, you ran this regression, you have this analysis, that's perfect. So even if you don't take those classes, definitely econometrics is going to give that to you.
Okay, thank you. I really appreciate it. That answers the question.
Yeah, no problem. Good luck.
For all of our students who are interested in research assistant positions or quantitative roles, one, consider taking part in undergraduate research at UVA. On the ECOS website, there is information about how to get involved in undergraduate research, whether it's here or with the National Science Foundation. And then also on your resumes, exactly what Katie has described to you as using an interview, you can on your resumes articulate your quantitative or research experience just by walking through a data set problem that you experience in, let's say, econometrics or in statistics, okay? And I'm glad to talk with you more offline about that, but right, the resume is the first step, right? Get it out there on the resume so people know that you have that experience, and then you can talk more about your interview. Okay, great. Other questions? Looking at the chat, we see something from Flora. Great, thank you for posting that, Flora, about undergraduate research. Any other questions from our students? All right, I'm going to bring up a little bit of a sensitive topic. I'm going to talk about compensation between public and private sector. And you know, a lot of our students are concerned, if I go into the public sector, my compensation won't be as high. So I want to know if you could share some of your thoughts on that along the way. And you know, maybe you could even talk about the federal hiring system. Who wants to jump in? Ilana, you want to share a little bit with us?
Sure. Yes, Jen, you're right. I think that is a sensitive topic. It truly depends. I just simplifying it a lot. I think you have your nonprofit think tank roles that will be sort of like lower on the compensation scale. Then you're looking at your federal jobs, and then you're maybe looking at your consulting, private sector, corporation type jobs in terms of like the tiers of income. You know, everybody makes different amounts of money. One thing that's interesting about the government is that you know how much everyone makes, which I think makes for a kind of interesting workplace. It's perhaps more equitable, but maybe more uncomfortable in some cases as well. The way it works at the EPA, and I only can speak for the EPA here, but basically you come in at a GS level, typically that's GS5 or GS7. If you have above a 3.0 GPA, I think you come in at a GS7 with just an undergraduate degree. After a year, you're automatically promoted to GS9 and then to GS11, 12, and then 13. And then after 13 is management series. So in terms of like the amount of time it takes to make a higher income, it's actually pretty quick. There's 5 years to get to max out sort of your income, but then it stops there. And you know, if you stay at GS13 for the rest of your career, you're really not seeing much growth. So that's something to definitely think about. That's just the maximum unless you go into the management series and then the senior executive series. The government has a lot of perks that are not compensation. So really, really generous retirement matching package, fantastic healthcare. Speaking from my job, amazing work-life balance. I don't work more than 40 hours a week. They're really good about it. And I really do appreciate that. More schedule flexibility. So there are sort of like non-tangibles that exist there that don't exist other places. But you know, you can look up exactly what you'll make at your position, which is sort of nice. And keep in mind that they are adjusted by where you live. So if you happen to not work in DC, look up where your area might be making. So if you work, for example, in like San Francisco or New York, the pay is actually a little bit higher than it is in DC. And then if you work in like rural Alaska, it would be lower. So I hope that was helpful. Katie, I'm sure you have more to add.
Great, thank you.
So it's exactly the same for me. I started at GS7, I went to GS9 after a year. And so I will say starting out, so I was choosing between two jobs. My other job would have paid more than GS7 would have. And that's like, you just have to decide what's important to you, because right, for federal government, you're not going to negotiate at all. There's not going to be any wiggle room. What you make is what you make, which I really respect and really like. And it's definitely tight the first year, but it's enough. Like you like I like it depends what your financial situation is. It's okay. But it's just they're just, you just have to weight it. It's really a personal choice. I've really enjoyed working with federal government for the most part. There's a lot of really incredible like non-tangible perks like Ilana talked about. And I think especially for me, the people that work there, right, these economists that I work with, they could be making a ton more money doing almost anything else. And they choose to like work here and work really hard. And I just think it drives a lot of really interesting people who like are very passionate at what they do. And I just like really enjoy that. And so that's like, it's just a trade-off. But I will say, right, so I'm going to the private sector, and I'm making a little bit more money, not a ton more money, because it's not we're working for a journalist organization, but so that was like a very weird process for me. I did negotiate my salary up, and I like was so uncomfortable doing that because that was so different than federal government. So if anybody that's not my government wants to talk about that process, I'm happy to do that. But so I'm making a little bit more, but not that much. But it's definitely, I like would be lying if I said that wasn't a factor of me leaving federal government. I did want to make more money. And living in DC is a really expensive city. So it's an unfortunate part of working in federal government. I think there's a lot of pros, but it's just part of the deal. And you'll make more money working somewhere else. That's just sort of a fact. Especially all of you guys are going to be incredibly qualified with like all of your skills. You could be making more money somewhere else, and it's just going to be how it is.
Yeah, and things are going to change for all of you students along the way. Things will become priorities that aren't priorities now, right? So, where I am in my career and Ilana and Katie are in their careers are very different. So we have different needs, and at different times you'll find the roles that fit that time. So thank you for being so candid, both of you. Really appreciate that. What is there that you would want to, well, anyone want to follow up on those comments from Ilana and Katie? Yeah, go ahead, Elena. Why don't you unmute yourself and introduce yourself and ask your question?
Hi, I'm Elena. I'm a third year. I was just wondering, like, you guys are living in DC and like, or I don't know, like, was it comfortable, like that salary? Like, it was survivable or?
Go ahead, Katie.
So yeah, so I moved to DC on the GS7. To be honest, I was living in Bethesda, which is cheaper than living in DC. I moved into like a group house there, so it was definitely survivable. It was tight, but totally fine. I wasn't like it was. And also, all of my friends were in the same situation, so it wasn't. I had a lot of friends working for the government, so it's not too bad. But I'm pretty fortunate in that I didn't have tons of other expenses. I'm not supporting anybody else other than me. So I could make that choice, but it depends. So it was definitely, and often you do move up after a year, and the jump from GS7 to GS9 is really significant. It made a huge difference. I live in DC now because of it. So that's huge and very helpful. So you just have to, a lot of times I say you just make it through the first year, and then it's a lot more comfortable. So that's where I was at.
Yeah, I agree with Katie. GS7, I think is kind of generous. I mean, it's not a lot, but it's generous and compared to like other roles like think tanks or nonprofits. It's more. At GS7, I moved into DC. I found a nice apartment, lived in an English basement, but it was nice, like exactly where I wanted to live. It was the pandemic, so wasn't like really going out and doing anything, but yeah, you budget, and I think it was fine. And I agree with Katie that a lot of my friends were in the same boat. So we would be cooking dinner at home a lot. And and then after a year, you get a lot more comfortable. And you do have to think about, like student debt and car payments, all of those things definitely do factor in. And as Katie said, I'm also fortunate that I don't support anyone else, but it was not too bad.
I think that you both, Katie, you alluded to this. It is difficult if you have friends who have a different lifestyle, right? So that can make a difference. If your friends have a similar lifestyle, you may not even notice, right? To the disparity in income between, private sector, public sector, or different roles that you're in, but that will make a difference. But follow your path. Follow what you are setting out for yourself to do, and try not to be swayed too much by what other people seemingly have. It's my editorial there. Okay, so Katie and Ilana, could you speak to yourself as the UVA student that you were, knowing what you know now, and just share some advice about the job search? It can be general, it can be really specific to the jobs that you applied for, or the jobs that you didn't get that you applied for.
I can start if that works.
Great.
I would say, yeah, so my fourth year self, I would say like it's really gonna be okay. I just was so anxious, and I think especially because I didn't know what I wanted, like I had so much trouble like settling down at all. And so my like big advice would be like, you're all incredibly qualified. You're like, something is gonna work out. And the other like advice sort of going off of that is hiring. I mean, it's not random, but essentially to you it might be, because you have no idea what the company is thinking, right? You have no access to that information. So like you don't know why you did or didn't get a job. It's not because you weren't qualified. It could be because they were looking for some like very specific skill that this one person had. And like there could be 100 applications for 3 slots. So it's just your chances, right? It's just you never know what's happening on the other side of the curtain. So it's not worth saying like, oh, like I wasn't qualified for this. You just didn't get it. And that like happens. And so you like, if there's a 10% probability of you getting any given job, the more you apply to, the more better chance you have getting a job. So just, I think putting less weight on any single application would have been more important for me. It would have helped me calm down a little bit. So, and now being on the other side of the hiring, there's so many people that I would have loved to hire that we just didn't. So you're going to be okay. It's going to be fine. You're all qualified would be the best advice, I think, for myself in my fourth year.
Yeah, I think that was awesome, Katie. And Jen, I liked what you said earlier about try not to compare yourself to other people, know your path. Everyone is different. People make different amounts of money. People do different things. So know your path and know why you're doing what you're doing as well as you can. I guess I would say the job search can be really demoralizing. It can really take a hit to your self-esteem. You won't get every job that you apply for. It never works like that. I guess just try to bear in mind, maybe write it down somewhere. You're coming from an awesome school. You're coming from an econ major. You're already, a great candidate. You're already competitive. And so just sort of like know that you're worth it. Don't settle for a job just because you think you won't get another one. And be picky. Be picky in doing something that you want to do, especially if you're thinking about working for the government, considering the compensation topic we just talked about. I think you know why you're doing it. And sort of hold out for something that aligns with what you want to do, because you will get that. It might take a little bit longer. The federal hiring process is long, but you are worth it. So that's what I would tell myself.
I think we'll end on that note. Wonderful advice. Thank you for that morale building advice, and all true. Our students are outstanding, applicants and students here at UVA, as you both were when you were here. So thank you for that.